lobbying is regulated in the United States and the European Union. Lobbying activities have to be disclosed. So if you are a firm that has a lobbyist that is living in DC, they have to be registered. They have to file regular reports on their lobbying activities, and they have to talk about what issues they are trying to influence. What the hopes behind this are that we don't have undue influence and make sure that politicians are representing the public's interests and not lobbying interests. Unfortunately, this doesn't always happen. There are situations where lobbyists influence in ways that are actually completely and totally against the public interest. But there are areas in policy that have extremely high lobbying influence. And so, like I talked about, we are the only country that doesn't have universal health care, the only developed country that doesn't have universal health care. And the main reason for that is the very strong lobbying presence of insurance companies. And when I was in grad school, I did a research paper on helmet laws and which state had helmet laws and which state didn't. And actually, helmet laws are very rare because the motorcycle industry and associations have extremely high lobbying, where public interest and research has shown that helmets should always be worn, and it's actually more beneficial to the public if there were strict helmet laws, but the lobbying strength of those entities is what prevents helmet laws from happening. Okay, one way is direct communication. So actually, anyone can directly communicate with government officials. Their fax numbers, phone numbers, email addresses and offices are all published. You can go to the Congress building and walk into their office and ask to speak to them. They also will have local, usually county offices or regional offices, and there will be days, but you can directly communicate. And actually, I highly encourage you to directly communicate with your representatives and advocate for things that you believe in. Okay, so businesses can just go straight to policymakers and say, I see that this legislation is pending, it's getting ready for a vote, and this is how I want you to vote and why. Okay, another way is expert witness testimony. Okay, and this can be things like maybe in the case of they might bring in like a doctor to discuss in a lawsuit about how a certain thing impacts a body. Just to give this as an expert in the medical field, they might give information on how a drug would impact the body in a case like the opioid situation. That can be another way that businesses get involved. So when they have a lot of knowledge or training, they can be called in to say, this is what I know from my experience when there are lawsuits or even congressional hearings. Okay, so when we have different things kind of happening, so like cyberbullying situations or cyber issues, then they might bring in people who are experts in cybersecurity to say, why does this happen? How does this happen? And tell us about this so we can make decisions about what kind of policy we want to put into place. Okay, political action committees or PACs. PACs are independent organizations that do campaign contributions. Okay, so they generally are affiliated with certain industries. So the Republican Party has a PAC, the Democratic Party has a PAC, but businesses can also have PACs. So I know one of the ones the book talks about, like Blue Cross Blue Shield, has a PAC. Actually, Elon Musk has a political action committee. So it's a way to facilitate getting funds to the hands of candidates. Other things that political action committees or groups can do is create ads. So this is where we see ads about certain political candidates or ads about certain issues. But it's a way for certain types of industries to get a lot of airtime, essentially. The disadvantages are that, contributions are capped, so how much can you give? And companies cannot give money directly to their affiliated PACs. So if I, as like Blue Cross Blue Shield, have a political action committee that I funnel contributions to healthcare issues, I can't actually donate to that political action committee. I can donate to individual candidates, but I can't donate to that political action committee. Okay, so this is an example of political action committee and their monetary amounts that they've run through in various situations. And so you can see where they can be individual businesses, they can be in favor of certain things. So you see where we look at like the National Association of Realtors. Well, they were actually very, very involved in politics in the state of Iowa, in lobbying for a certain policy as the state of Iowa was looking to change the way that realtor commissions happened. And the National Association of Realtors then was coming in and saying, this is the way that policy change about how commissions are paid would impact the industry and anyone who was working inside the industry. So they can be just for a particular industry or for a particular business by itself. Okay. We also have tax exempt organizations. This is another way. This is where we look at dark money contributions. So if you haven't looked at what dark money contributions are, I highly recommend you check it out. Look at what that kind of looks at. I do have a link in the Canvas course for OpenSecrets.org. And what OpenSecrets.org is a website that publishes organizations' contributions to political candidates. So it's a way, if you're interested, to see, and it separates out whether it was individual employees of that organization. So you might look and you see, Home Depot donated millions of dollars to this particular political party. But then when you look into their contributions, Home Depot itself might have only donated $100,000 as a corporation, but it also records all of their employees' personal donations. So sometimes that's something you might need to look at when you're thinking, they really support that party. I might think about boycotting them or not buying from them because they don't follow my own personal values. Then when you look, it's actually their employees that were making the donations and not the corporation itself. So I encourage you to really investigate that and look at that. especially if you are particularly interested in supporting businesses that support your own personal values. Okay, corporate contributions to politics. So Citizens United, this was a case that went up against the Supreme Court. So before Citizens United, corporations were extremely limited in how much they could direct to political campaigns. And after Citizens United, campaign contributions had no cap, especially coming from businesses directly. Critics said it would corrupt democracy. 80% of people were against this being passed. It was not a popular decision by the Supreme Court, and it still continues to be an unpopular decision, especially as the amount of election spending continues to climb. So this also gets back to this after Citizens United, and then also the McCutcheon, where we've abolished all limits on election spending. It really is kind of whoever can get the most money versus who's better for the, it's become much, much more of a monetized system, of a pay to play, of whoever can give the most money is who. And so we went from having presidential campaigns that were spending, $300,000 to $500,000 to the most recent presidential campaign, or 2020 presidential campaign between Biden and Trump, that was in the billions of dollars, where they had both spent over $1 billion and received over $1 billion in campaign contributions. So since these limits on election spending and election contributions have been lifted, it's become a much different playing game, and the amount, especially of presidential elections and the spend on presidential elections, has gone up every single election cycle since these laws were passed. Okay, economic leverage. So this was when a business uses its economic power to threaten to leave a city, state, or country unless they get their way. A famous example of this is the Vikings Stadium in Minnesota. So the Vikings wanted to build a new stadium, which they have now, but they didn't want to pay for it. They wanted the state of Minnesota to pay for it, and they believed that the state of Minnesota should build them a new stadium because of the economic value having an NFL football team brought to the state, and especially the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so the owners of the Vikings told the state of Minnesota, if you don't build us this new stadium, we're going to take the Vikings to another state. We're going to move out of the state of Minnesota, and you're not going to have an NFL team, and that's going to be a decision you made by choosing not to support us. So ultimately, that did win over their argument. They also promised if they built a new stadium, they would bring a Super Bowl to Minnesota. This did also happen. So a Super Bowl was hosted in that stadium. They also have a lot of concerts and other kind of events in those stadium. But it was built by the state after a fight between the state and the Vikings, where the Vikings said, we don't have to be in the state of Minnesota. We can take the team somewhere else. There's also a couple examples in the textbook also of large sports teams threatening to leave cities and move to different states. Okay. If you remember a few chapters back, one of the opening reading was talking about Elon Musk and COVID policies, where he fought with the state of California over COVID shutdowns. states, and he refused to shut down his Tesla factories and the Tesla headquarters when the government had called for a shutdown. And so he was being fined, and he had multiple states with the state, multiple issues and fights with the state of California over varying things. And eventually he moved the entirety of Tesla out of California and relocated it to the state of Texas. So businesses will use that. The Barilla factory in Ames also did that thing. They had actually gotten to where their tax incentive for bringing the business into the state of Iowa had expired, and they told the state of Iowa, if you don't extend our tax provisions by another 5 years, we'll take our business elsewhere, we'll take all of those jobs with us, and we'll leave the state of Iowa. Okay. Other kinds of political strategies. So grassroots strategy. So this is where we try to get the public in support of our position. So we send information out and we ask citizens to fight in our behalf. We put commercials out on TV about why, information saying why we think it's best. Things like, we have kind of a large, it's always interesting to me how the citizen response is really negative towards universal health care, even though economically and through research it's shown that everyone would actually benefit from universal health care. So there would be massive economic benefit. It would cost the government less money. It would make us a healthier society. We'd have better access to health care. There's all these benefits from universal health care. And yet we have this grassroots strategy from businesses that are anti universal health care that puts so much information out in the public against it that nobody hears the good stuff unless they're searching for it. So how can we try to, get information in front of the broad public? Okay, stakeholder coalitions. So this is, again, where we get different groups together to support our political agenda. So this is even where we bring all of the businesses within an industry. So a good example of a stakeholders coalition is like the Realtors Association. So the Realtors Association just tries to make sure that any policies that they're going to do about realty or home sales or how that works, and how it impacts realtors as a whole in the United States. Okay. Advocacy, advertising, and public relations. So advertisements that focus on a company's views or controversial political issues. One example that I sometimes bring up about this for public relations would be some companies do their political strategy very quietly. Okay, so it's behind the scenes. They lobby, they donate money towards their causes, they try to encourage different kind of policy, but they don't really vocally talk to their customers about what their political ideology is. Other companies are very loud about their political ideology and tell everyone what they believe and why they believe it. Okay, so this also gets into public relations. So sharing out your views on political issues, which then is either going to get you customers or lose you customers, because there's a wide variety of people. Some people say, I want to hear businesses' views because then I can choose who I shop with, who I give my money to. And others say businesses should just stay out of politics. Well, the truth is no business is staying out of politics. There are just some that are quieter than others. All businesses are getting involved in politics. They're all working on one side or the other, or even sometimes both sides. Sometimes companies work both sides because it doesn't matter which side votes for them as long as their policy is supported. Okay. But I will give one example of public relations in controversial political issues would be Penzeys Spices. Penzeys Spices is extremely vocal about their political beliefs. Every single email they send talks about their political beliefs. In addition to their products, what Penzeys sells is kitchen spices. But they also have added a menu item onto their menu or onto their website. So here, I just opened their website right now, and I see the choices are spices, trial sizes, gift boxes, about us, and about Republicans. Okay. Penzeys is an extremely left-leaning corporation, and they will tell you all about it and why they are. And in fact, they've gone to the public relations point of talking about Republicans on their website in every email they send. So that's somebody who's taken a very loud stance about their political opinions. Okay, so some companies, as I said, choose to be very vocal in that. Okay, we can have trade associations. So trade associations, also this Realtors Association, if you join like an accounting association, so like the AICPA, which is the Association of CPAs, they go out and lobby for policies that are to protect the accounting industry. You know, they lobby for education, for licensing rules and regulations, for different things like that. So different trade associations, builders trades, construction trades, they all have their own associations that you can join. Okay. And then we also have legal challenges where businesses seek to overturn a law after it has been passed, because they don't like the new regulation, or the regulation might violate, they feel it violates their principles. So the example the book gives, and this is a really good example for this, but the book doesn't really do a good job of explaining how exactly this went about. And actually, at the time, the media also didn't do a very good job of explaining how it went about. When the Affordable Care Act was put into law, there were different healthcare provisions that were added to it that had never existed before. So basically what the government said was health insurance companies had to start doing these things that had previously not existed. One was that you could be denied if you had a pre-existing condition. That was a previous thing before the Affordable Care Act. After the Affordable Care Act, insurance companies could no longer deny you for a previous existing condition. This cost a lot more money to health insurance companies. So if I changed jobs, say I had cancer and I was getting care at my job, and then I changed jobs and changed health insurance companies, they used to be able to say, no, that's an existing condition. We're not going to cover that. You're a high-risk person, and we're not going to pay for that. That's no longer legal. One of the other things that was added in the Affordable Care Act was that insurance companies had to cover birth control. So before this, birth control was not covered by insurance. And if people wanted birth control products, they had to pay for them full price out of pocket. Okay. And so when this provision came in and they said, if you provide health insurance to your employees, that health insurance has to cover birth control. And what happened was Hobby Lobby said, we are a religious organization. So Hobby Lobby is a private corporation. They do not sell stock on the New York Stock Exchange. They are privately held. They're a privately held corporation. They said, we are very religious, and being religious is a very big part of our mission. And because of that, we're very against providing birth control to our employees. And so they sued the federal government, and they said we should get a religious exemption from having to provide birth control. And what the problem was is they weren't fighting to not provide any birth control to their employees. They were fighting against a certain class of birth control. And what that class of birth control was, things like the morning after pill. From what they said was, as a Christian-based company, we are very anti-abortion, and we feel the class of drugs where the morning after pill falls into that category of an abortion, like the morning after pill, Plan B, those kinds of things. And so this case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court agreed with them. They said, you can be given a religious exemption out of all of the types of birth control. You do not have to provide your employees these 4 birth control products like Plan B and the morning after pill that consider, so we're going to give you a religious exemption. You do have to pay for birth control pills and IUDs and other types of birth control. But yes, we will grant you a religious exemption, and you do not have to provide morning after pills and Plan B and those kinds of birth control drugs. And so that's an example of a business trying to overturn a law after it's been passed. And they didn't overturn the law, but they were able to get a religious exemption that helped support what their personal company values were, but still allowed them to follow the law in a way that they felt comfortable with. Okay? And that is the end of our week 6 discussion.